Oh yeah, Paul's going to come up and join me. You get free Paul.
That'd be inappropriate.
No, yeah, that's the inappropriate joke. We'll have to share a mic. My wife, because Owen's going to come get that one in a minute, but we'll share this one. This is not working, though, with that feedback. Anyway, my wife's an attorney, and she doesn't go to trial very often, but early in her career, they had to go to a trial where she was defending a software company, actually, a medical software company, not us. They wrote lab interface software, and one of their employees did something. I think he stole some of their IP or something like that. I don't remember the case, but the guy was pretty obnoxious. And she said, there they are in this Vermont courtroom, kind of fancy. You've got the plaintiff on one side and the defense on the other. And during one of the breaks, people are milling around, like we're at the users conference here. And you know, the way the courtroom works, they have these tables that are like this, and there are these mics like this. And the guy who was at the center of the lawsuit, when everyone's just sort of sitting around, talking, milling around for a minute, he goes over away from everyone and very subtly, or at least that was intent, farted right into the microphone. So everyone's in the room like this, and all of a sudden I was like, and everyone jumped. And she told me the story, and I was like, I would pay $1,000 for a video of that. I mean, like this, it was. She said that the guy he jumped himself, and then sort of like ran out of the courtroom, and it was no one said anything about it. No one said anything about it. Like, oh, that's so amazing.
And that is your 12-year-old little boy telling a story. Yeah.
That's what you get when you had to kill a little time. So, before we start,
What are the ground rules?
the ground rules are, I want you to start thinking of a question that you want to ask that we're going to crowdsource in this room, very likely. If there's something you want to know, advice you want, I asked Paulie to be up here because sometimes he has additional information that I don't have. Sometimes we don't agree entirely on everything, and his perspective gives us another viewpoint. How many of you watched at least one of the webinars that Paulie and I did during COVID? Okay.
I did.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't watch any of them. So this is almost like the live webinar. Yeah, sorry, Owen.
Without an agenda.
Yeah, without an agenda. We don't have a special guest. You're the special guest today. So, Owen, whenever you're ready, whatever you want to do.
We have to tell Duncan what mic we're using. So because our lovely friend Polly's joining us on stage, I will walk over to you guys with mics when you have questions. Welcome to Ask Chip, everybody's favorite hour of the conference, unbelievably. I always volunteer to moderate because it gets me out of packing the truck back up.
That is how this entire thing started.
Chip was like, I don't want to.
We used to have, for those of you who are old school, we used to have to put terminals at every workstation because you didn't have laptops you can bring. And we would have hundreds of these things. And and then what would happen is everyone was like, oh, but if the show goes until 4 o'clock, we have to be with the clients until 4 o'clock. We're still milling around and talking at 5, and we can't start breaking down until later. And I literally just said, well, why don't I just sit there in the auditorium, in the amphitheater in Vermont, which a lot of you have been to. Why don't I just sit there in the amphitheater and I'll answer questions. You guys can break down. And everyone thought it was awesome, and I was like, yes.
And then last year, Erin was like, would you consider moderating for Ask Chip? And I was like, sure. And then she watched me deal with Chip for an hour, and she was like, you're never not doing that again. So I'm permanently assigned to Ask Chip, which I'm not going to argue with. Let's kick it off. Does anybody have, oh, look, we already see.
And you can also ask Paul.
Oh, yeah, well, this is great. It's like Ask Chip and Paul.
Okay, so at lunch, we were chatting, and this is a bit in response to your CEO talk today. there are 3 of us at our office that are probably functioning in the CEO role, but slightly different portions of it. Like there's a person who's kind of now doing more finances and operations, and maybe the ones will be more visionary. It sort of seems like they're all CEOs, but maybe, or COO, CFO. But so I guess the question is can that, you seem to in the talks say no, there's got to be one, but in a group of 7 partners, the 3 of us almost function like a, you know, Gamora, or whatever, the Godzilla 3-headed monster as a CEO.
So my answer to that would be, let me see if I can make sure I understand it. Like, can we effectively operate as a C-suite with 3 of us sharing the roles of the traditional elements of CFO, CEO, and COO? And, pardon me, obviously on one hand, there are hundreds of pediatric practices who've done stuff like that for decades, and they still survive and they still make money. There are a bunch in this room. You're doing it. The question is whether or not you have a strategy for the future, and or are you just a boat on the whitewater rapids of healthcare, and you're just hoping to make it down to the calm part? If you want to have a vision and a culture and have a plan, a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, I think it would be very, very difficult to do that in a shared CEO model. And keep in mind, remember, with a CEO, a CFO position, the finances, and let's call COO HR, just roughly, those are very tactical things. Those are necessary elements of your work. I mean, any solos in here are operating like that right now, all right? Your CEO, CFO, and COO. But if you want to actually have a vision for your practice where you become something more, then I believe that you have to have one person acting as the visionary, and the others, or at least one other person, acting as what I'll call an integrator, an implementer, someone who actually executes on that stuff. So it's possible. Maybe, because we have a bunch of them, maybe you know, if this isn't your case, but maybe you're a husband-wife team, okay? And you have, you know, you're simpatico enough that you can operate in that way, but that's unlikely. Chances are with any 2 people, one of you is better at something than someone else. So if nothing else, I would strongly recommend, because what you just described, besides being entirely typical, I mean, you heard yourself, right? Like, we don't really have a plan. We don't really know exactly what lane we're in. Yes, he does the finances, she does the computer, or whatever. You've got some of that stuff divvied up. But you really need to be more formal than that. You need to have that understanding. Especially if you have 3 of the owners doing all the work and 4 of the owners receiving the benefit of that work without that same contribution.
I'm going to add 2 things to that. Number 1 is, what are those 3 different positions doing? And the first question you should be asking yourself is, you know, sort of thinking, as a pediatrician, what is your single greatest asset? And I'm going to tell you, as I wear a CFO hat on, is the ability to generate income. There comes a point where doing some of those administrative responsibilities takes away from your ability to generate income for the practice.
You are a really expensive,
Exactly. Right.
Admin person in your office.
And so what I encourage practices to think about is an exercise called the responsibility matrix. And if you go to I'm not trying to promote myself. If you go to the PMI website, type in responsibility matrix, there's a whole exercise. And in there, there's a spreadsheet with over 300 items that someone needs to be responsible for. And what you do is you say, who's going to be responsible for these different tasks? Which sounds like what you've kind of already done. But at some point, you got to take a step back and say, look, what makes the most sense? And then, so that's one thing you can do as within your own practice, identifying who can do what. And the last part I'll say on this is, whatever those responsibilities are, stay in your lane.
Yeah.
Because I know if I want the answer I'm looking for, I know who to go ask. And we don't want the employees and the team playing mom against dad. So it can work. I believe, I'm a little bit more optimistic than him. It can work as long as the rules of engagement are stay in your lane with clearly defined roles.
Does having a CEO visionary mean that they're solely responsible for the vision of the practice, or can other partners and other executives, CFO, contribute to the vision with the CEO being the one that's ultimately accountable and responsible for the vision?
So, you want it?
I'm going to tell you something that you don't want to hear. And I'm not speaking directly to you. Not every pediatrician is CEO material. Okay? It comes down to skill set. For me, I know my skill set. I am not a CEO. I'm a decent CFO because it's tactical. When it's about the talent, and you don't want to shape the role. The role of CEO requires strategic thinking. Why put someone who doesn't have that capability in that role? So
I would add two things along that line. You used a very important word. That word is responsible. So whether, depending on how you define responsible or where, when, every single owner of a business ultimately is responsible for the mission, vision, and values when you do it right. I know I just want to extend that comment, or extend your comment. That wasn't where you were going with it. And I'm just saying, so even if you've given the financial duty, you've named one of your partners CFO, they're still responsible for it. And a good CEO is absolutely going to take the input of the owners and the staff of the community to develop and drive those mission, vision, and values. And the fact is that the culture that your practice delivers is entirely dependent on what the owners of the business do and how they behave. Your culture, the culture in your practice is never, ever, ever going to be better than the way you treat your patients, the way your staff sees you treat the patients. And so I think you were asking a slightly different question, and I'll try to answer that, which is, you're saying, like, look, is a visionary someone who just accepts lightning bolts from heaven and just comes into the office and says, this is our vision, take it or leave it? And I don't think you expect me to say yes to that. And the answer is no. The visionary has to take into account who's on the team right now, what they're capable of doing. But at the end of the day, this reminds me of a moment. One of the first Ask Chip sessions we ever did. This reminds me of this in a second. Or I'll tell you. Years ago, it was in Vermont, and it might have been the first time I did it. And does everyone here know who Dr. Una is? People know Dr. Una? Yes, I know you do. She's a PCC client, and this was before she became Dr. Una with a capital D and a capital U. She used to be very quiet and, hey, and so she's not at all anymore. But she sat, like right where Hero is sitting right now, and she said, so Chip, what is the optimum number of partners in a practice? And I think she was looking for a number, like 3, which would support this idea of 3 partners, and we split up the CEO, the C-suite duties. And I finally, it stumped me for a minute, and then I realized, no. The right answer for a successful business, for the right number of partners, is always as few as possible. The more centralized you have the vision casting, let's call it, the more likely you are going to have the results that you want. When you have 2 or 3 or 4 people with different visions even if they're related. I mean, the efficiency of trying to accomplish the vision of 3 competing doctors out of 7 partners, it's impossible. Never seen it done. So the more you can concentrate in any circumstance, the vision setting, the better off you will be.
Most multi-million, multi-billion-dollar companies, and I'm going to say 99.9% of you guys are multi-million-dollar businesses. But really big, successful businesses, the CEO is also an extension of the board of directors who are making decisions. So in an ideal world, if you have a partnership with 4 or 5 people, once a year, those 4 partners are coming together, discussing the strategy and the vision, and it's the expectation that that singular leader or CEO is executing the strategic vision of the practice. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I want you to get together more than once a year.
Correct.
Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah.
That's it, otherwise. Yes?
So less 10,000 feet, probably more 2,000 feet. When you're looking at new practices that are starting, or you're looking at opening another office or things like that, have you ever looked in that massive pile of data that you have to sort of project the rates of patient accumulation in the different, in different scenarios?
I actually have. I can tell you very directly what we know.
Please.
Yeah, so I don't know why this would be important to you, Mark Helm. So here's what we know. I took a look at all the startup practices that I mentioned earlier today. PCC has signed something like 57 startup practices since 2019. So by the way, when people tell you that independent pediatrics is dead, it's insanely, yeah. Wait, what'd you say? It's bullshit. So we have that data. Now, not all startups are created equally. Some startups are 3 people peeling off from 10 people. Some startups are 1 person who's been in town forever as a hospitalist, and now, they have different, some startups are from divorces, some who show up in town with 0 patients. If I eliminate the people who already have clearly some traffic, some demand, on average, because there's a pretty wide range of actual results, but on average, it takes about 18 months for a practice to get up to full speed, or what you would consider, many of them keep going after that, but 18 months is where you're like, okay, we are now at the place where we expect to make money. That's what I saw with some consistency. And I don't know what makes that magic. My guess is, one little guess that I have is that you're adding new patients all along, but you're never actually going to get to your number, really, because I'm counting visits, not patients when I do this. You gotta get through that first year, because now you're getting repeat well visits. All right? Because you get automatic volume from after that first year again. And that's my experience. I hope that matches what you're asking for.
You talked about having as few partners as possible, but doesn't that make succession planning a little bit more difficult? What we've seen in our area is a lot of practices that have a limited number of partners as they get well on in their career have been the ones selling to hospitals or private equity. So how do you balance that between having fewer partners and still thinking about succession planning?
So the first thing I would say is, it
He
shouldn't.
trapped you.
No, I'm trying to. What I was trying to avoid is, first of all, because you were going somewhere with this. Look at how other businesses do this. Look at how Apple makes a big deal about changing their CEO, or Yahoo, or any of these people. And what they do is they say, we are changing now. And what it means, all right, one of the problems that a lot of you have is that you get into the position of managing your practice, and you're not willing to move out of that position until you are forced to. That's really the bigger problem. So if I pick on Mike Chamberlain, okay, you're going to be practicing for a while, okay? You're not, you at least another 25 years in you, all right? I'm just kidding. But you have some time left. And let's say, well, we know this is the case, but let's say you're the managing partner. Your succession plan should be, or should look like something along the lines of, and you will be mentoring a replacement and stepping down while you are perhaps still there. Now, of course, you all meddle after the fact. You're all control freaks, if you have a plan that everyone understands, that's how it has to happen. What you don't want is that I am the CEO until my last breath or my last patient, which is what a lot of you do. Right?
So if, I never was an athletic person, so I abhor athletic analogy, but this is the appropriate analogy to consider is you're in the role of the quarterback, calling the plays, executing the plays. You're the one making the game happen. How do we, and at what time do we move you from being a quarterback to the coach on the sideline coaching the next quarterback, right? And that is, to Chip's point, is part of that development and strategy. Now, with regard to future partners, I have said time and time again, anyone who wants to be a partner in a pediatric practice, give me 5 minutes with them and I'll convince them it's the craziest idea they ever thought of. 95% of the time people want to become partners, it's a financial consideration. They want to make more money. I believe the environment is very different today than it was 10 years ago. For sure, different than 20 years ago. I had a conversation on Monday with a prospective partner with a practice where the buy-in was going to be $200,000. And she was like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. Yeah, it is a lot of money. But what I had to explain to her is like, look, you're going to buy in for $200,000. It's a very well-run practice. You should be able to make another $70,000 a year. That's a 30% return on investment, and it's usually find me a better deal where I can make 30% a year, keep all my clothes on, and not go to jail. Okay?
I'll pay to make sure Paul can keep his clothes on.
Exactly. Sorry to be graphic, but just to illustrate the point. But even with that, the carrot of 30% return on investment, it still was not good enough. There's a different mindset of people who are interested in becoming partners today than it was years ago. We have more partners on a part-time basis. We're not filling all the residency slots. Am I correct in that? There's just less pediatricians coming in. There's just that entrepreneurial spirit. It's just not there for what it once used to be. And so that is a challenge that will continue that to me, that's what keeps me up at night when I think about practices. And I think the future is going to be the people who are willing to play the long game. It is okay to be the single owner and you have a lot of people working, and it is a challenging situation, but there can be some opportunity, depending on the personalities within the practice, to have a succession plan and have people coming in. But at the end of the day, the other reality is that in order to buy into a practice, we do valuation. We've done 18 valuations in the last 6 weeks for a variety of reasons. And we generally have to heavily discount the true business value in order to entice someone or make it appealing for someone to buy into the practice. That's just the financial reality.
I'd also add, many of you were in the pediatric CEO discussion we had today. I was talking with Jesse Hackle at the end of it, and I was talking about some practices. I'd actually mentioned this in the class about how I've been working with some practices where the expectation of partnership was just something that was just done, and he was like, yes, he said that's what it was like 20 or 30 years ago. Partner was status. As much as it's money, it was status. And that's what you could do 30 years ago when you were generating enough money that you didn't have to run your business as well. The federal and state governments weren't in your business as much. The pharmacies weren't trying to take your business. And United Healthcare 30 years ago was just annoying. Now they are a cancerous tumor that has grown throughout, or they are like a cancerous tumor that has grown throughout the healthcare system. So my point is, I think there's still a lot of expectation. Doctors are ambitious, high flying. They want to accomplish stuff, and their next step is to be partner. And as Paul pointed out, not everyone is cut out to be a partner. And you can solve the need for a higher demand for money quite easily. You can look at someone and say, I will gladly pay you more. I will pay you based on your production. And I can show, you guys have been to my classes about this. Hiro and I taught a class about this at the NCE. And we were supposed to do it last year, but Hiro had to cancel. Remember that? It was sad. But we have the tools are really simple. You can say to these employed physicians, here's how much revenue you generate, here's the overhead, and then here's the VIG. This is what I get paid to be the owner. And as Paul pointed out, you can actually scare a lot of people when you say, hey, look, you're complaining to me about your salary, but would you pay, would you do, you see all the work I do. You see every weekend that I come in. You see the arguments I get into with the insurance companies. You see all the crying staff. You see all the vaccines nonsense. You're dealing with, pardon me, immunizations. You're dealing with refrigerators. You're dealing with nasty landlords. You are the one who has to unplug the toilet and plug the fridge back in. All of those things. If you want the extra $50,000 that I get from you for doing that work, go open your own business. And most people are like, oh, no, glad to give you that VIG. And there's a reason why.
And then I'll add to this. What happened with Village when the pharmacies, they shutting down all the primary care centers? You know what that proves? That everyone in this room is really doing very hard stuff very well.
Yeah, better than Walmart.
I mean, some of the smartest people in the world had to have been working for Village and Walmart and Walgreens and those people, and they threw in the towel. So,
Yep.
We don't want to sound doom and gloomy. Everyone should be giving yourself a pat on the back that you have succeeded where multi-billion-dollar companies have simply failed. Mm-hmm. And you should hold your head up high. And the fact that we're having questions about what is the best strategy, I love these questions because you're not worried about, we're not having questions about the fundamentals. We're having questions about how do we go from success to continued success.
And today, one of the comments in my slide deck that I totally forgot to talk about was, I want everyone to think back, for those of you who are around, 20 years ago, to what pediatric conferences looked like 20 years ago. It was 90% billing and coding. In fact, so the AAP, that's probably about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. Paul will know because this involves him. The AAP they did a national pediatric event. It was a pediatric coding and practice management event, and it was sold out. All right, they did one in Portland, Oregon. They did one in Florida, Jersey. Yeah, and it was packed. And I went. PCC was the sponsor. I went to a bunch of them, and everything they talked about, 110%, was tactical. How to bill, how to code, how to bill, how to code. And remember, 30 years ago, that tactical behavior. That's ownership behavior. But over the last 10, 15, 20 years, 5 years, starting then though, once that started happening, the conferences, all of these conferences have started to become more strategic because you've had to go from being owners who just got ownership for status purposes and a little bit more money. Now you actually have to think about plans and viability. And you know what happened? It was funny. The AAP canceled it because they weren't making money. They were sold out, but they weren't making money. And Rich Lander, to his credit, called the AAP and said, hey, if I get PCC to do this, will you guys endorse it? So we did it for 2 years, I think. That's my memory. Some went well. I mean, some were packed. Some were standing room only. Some were not. And then, but we started to do pretty well, and so the AAP got ticked off and told us to stop. And then, lo and behold, this guy I don't know, Paul Vanchieri, fires up this thing called PMI. And I didn't know him, and I remember this, seeing these messages on SOPM, and I'm like, who is this guy doing practice management? That is our gig. And he started small, like your first couple of years, I mean,
the first one we ever did was in Chicago. It was me, Dr. Lander, and Dr. Brian Sibley. There were, I think, 11 people in the room.
right.
And, but it illustrates, filling that void, and it recognizing that that's what people wanted. People recognize that we need to be more strategic in our thinking, and that's what really, the top 10 practices that come to mind all have that
CEO, strategic perspective.
someone there filling that strategic
Yeah,
role.
and you can see the change in content at your state chapters. I can see her right there, Katrina Skinner. You've got Women in Pediatrics and Pediatric CEO. And Pediatric CEO is all about strategy. And that Pediatric CEO would have had 3 people in attendance in 2003. Because there are only 3 people in the country, and none of whom actually needed it, because they were the ones working that way. We're now in a place where strategic thinking is what is going to get us through whatever the next change, COVID, whatever it is. Anyway, yes, next question, please.
So
Ask a coding question. That would be perfect.
no, this one's strategy too.
Yeah.
So when you're looking to bring somebody into the practice, to bring another physician, and you're strategically looking for the person who you can hand the reins to one day, are there things that you can look for in the interview process? Are there qualities that you guys have seen that you can actually find out on the front end?
So I'll say 2 things to that. Number 1, say 3 things. Number 1, the answer is going to be incredibly practice specific, right? Because your culture is different. So more than anything, you need someone to align with your culture. And you won't fully know. You are going to have to trust your instinct. You bring someone in, and then this is from the Pediatric CEO Workforce Assay. Do they get it? Do they want it? And are they capable of doing it? So those first and foremost, that's what I would look for. And then I'm going to circle back around. And then, so let's say you hire someone with that in mind, and you discover that they're missing an element of what you think needs to take over. That doesn't mean they're still bad for your practice. And in fact, if you've structured your practice right, they can make a lot of money working in a place they want to work, contributing heavily. It just means that maybe they won't be the CEO of the business. Do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay.
So this is, I guess, a pivot from the CEO conversation a little bit. Are there certain data points in our finances that will give us good, or like when we're looking at, we're full in our current space, thinking about adding a new site, thinking about, okay, we probably have the demand in the community to tolerate expansion. Are there certain things that we could look at in like our information of visits, counts, financials that are good indicators that we'll be successful?
Specifically for the purpose of adding a new location?
Yeah, like we're thinking about adding a new location. So what should we be looking at to say, oh, that's a good idea, or that's a 2 years from now idea, 3 years from now, or that a next week if we could, I mean, it's hard to pin you down on that in this setting.
Yeah, so Chris Forleo entered the room at exactly the best time, because 6-8 months ago, he actually asked me and Alex Mayer to create a presentation about that very concept. And we got a lot of it done, but we haven't been able to get over the hump, especially because Alex is about to go on paternity leave. So I can tell you what we sort of assembled so far. I'm saying this from memory. So I don't have the sort of draft version of the slide deck in front of me. Opening a new location is a challenging thing, and you want to be able to have. It would be awesome if we had math that would say, all right, you pull the trigger when you hit this button, right? Or when you hit this line. So there are a couple things that I would consider. First of all, just because we're harping on this point nonstop, it's 2024, is it within the vision, the mission, and the plan for your practice to expand that way? All right, and that seems like an obvious thing to ask, but if it turns out that you have 7 partners and 3 of them are going to retire in 5 years and they don't want the capital expenditure for a new location that isn't going to benefit them financially, you have a challenge. And so you have to figure out how does this, let's wave a magic wand and pretend we do it all right. Is this a path we want to follow? That's number 1. Number 2, there are some very tactical and obvious numbers that you want to consider in terms of how many clinicians do we have, how many exam rooms do we have, how often are they full, where are our patients coming from, if we depending on where we expand to, will we be cannibalizing patients from our existing location, or are we going to build a practice in a location that doesn't have anyone right now? You're going to talk about the map thing in a second. And I really mean it. This goes back to the question that Mark Helm asked, which was, or I'm going to tell you, it's probably in the most common scenarios about opening a second location, it's probably going to take 18 months to get that other location up to speed. Now, I've seen it happen in 3 months, and I've seen it never actually catch. But you're going to be looking at, there are a bunch of things you can do. Like these are the things that I would do. Like if I worked in your office and you were asking me to solve this question, one of the things I'd be working hard on is your practice visit potential. So this is going to sound counterintuitive, but it's something to consider. Let's say that you were one of, there's Stephen Hirsch right there. Perfect well visit volume, right? His coverage is almost 100%. You can name the 5 kids who aren't caught up, because he probably can, all right? When he thinks about opening a new location, he has no extra fat. He doesn't have 1,000 kids who aren't caught up on their well visits who he can do a recall to and drive there. This is one of the contradictions of being incredibly well run. All right, that if you run inefficiently, there are some of our practices during COVID fared better financially because they were poorly run before COVID and were able to find efficiencies to make up some of that money. Now, of course, you're like, well, should I be poorly run? And the answer is no, because you lost $1 million leading up to that, okay? But if you have a practice, you've got a decent sized practice. If you want, we can pull your dashboard up in front of everyone and see how you do. But if you have a few hundred or a few thousand kids who are overdue for well visits and screenings and everything like that, and depending on the nature of where you're putting this location, that tells you right away, I might be able to jumpstart that 18 months because I can drive those visits there, especially because I can target people who are closer to that location. Does that make sense? Now, Paul.
And so with that, so many of you know that I've been the CFO for the last 6 years with a practice here in Denver. We have 26 providers, 3 locations. And we've been talking about this through the years because Denver is an exploding metro area. But we're looking at some things, and some of the things we do is we went and we mapped out where all the patients live. We mapped out where all the kids are under the age of 5. And we did it by, these patients are from these locations and so forth. And it gives us that opportunity to identify visually where should we be. Now, that's number 1. Look at that data to help you out. The second thing is that you need to think about within your practice, are you going to be a hub and spoke model with one central office and a couple of satellites? Or are you going to be one big building with all your providers. Both strategies have worked very well. And I mean, I know they're not in the room, they're watching the live stream because him and I have been texting, but the one that comes to mind is Fort Wayne Pediatric. You know, it is a huge building, and in their market and their culture and their vision and their strategy, it works well for them. But if you're in a place like Denver, that strategy may not always work.
Because the patients might be 20 miles away.
Exactly. And going 10 miles, it takes a longer time than going 10 miles in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So it's going to vary. But the most important thing, aside from the data and aside from the mapping, is how are you going to replicate that culture?
Oh, yeah, you stole my line. Keep going. That's
Yeah.
what I was going to say next.
I'm a little disappointed you didn't bring that up first.
I was like going to close on it. Keep going.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. But how are you going to replicate that culture? And because it is, the people are working there not because of how much they get paid. They should be working there because they're committed to the mission and the values of the practice, which is exemplified by the partners and the owners of the practice.
Yeah, and so, for example, I'm eyeballing someone who's dealing with this now. What do you do when you have a second practice and you can't be in that location every day? You can't be in two locations. So you have to decide whether your intent is to have two locations with identical cultures, or if there is a flavor of the different offices that benefits both the patients and you. I have some clients who have 3, 4, 5 location practices where the doctors are always working at the same locations. Right, and you can't.
And that comes with a lot of risk too, because you end up with potentially 3 different fiefdoms that
You don't. Yeah,
gotta be
it's
careful
never even potential. It always happens. Always. And especially if you've got this office manager here and this office manager there. This person considers herself to be the CEO of this location, and so she makes decisions that are really not aligned with the others. These are just the things you have to consider. And what happens if the performance in your second location somehow differs from the performance in your first location? How do we dig into it? How do we find it? How do we fix it? Now, what I just described makes it sound like, oh my gosh, you can never have a second location. That's too much work. It's not true.
We're just
It's just
telling
a lot
you
of
what
work.
you need to think through.
Yeah, remember, if you were around for when your practice first started, it might be 10% easier to do a second location, maybe 20% easier.
Now, the other thing now.
What's that? Sorry?
So coming from
Oh.
background as a medical director of some pediatric clinics,
Hold on, Dr. Birch.
Yeah, this is good stuff. I want to hear this perspective.
So coming from a background as a medical director of 7 pediatric clinics before I went at a hospital system, before I went independent, I would say multiple locations are actually harder. And it's harder not the work, but it's harder the culture.
Totally agree with that.
And unless you can be in 2 places at one time, or you are rotating through as the culture champion, or in the situation if you're just absolutely lucky where you have a culture clone of yourself, it's I would say exponentially harder to maintain alignment than it is, in my experience, opening up my own independent practice where I'm there all the time.
No, see, you're absolutely right. And when I was saying, when I said, it might be 10 or 20% easier, I was literally thinking just about the tactical elements. Like when because you have some pieces in place, you have some people you can trust, but it is a lot of work. But like all of these things, the hard work is not actually opening the practice. It just feels like it. The hard work is actually maintaining 2 places and having them run efficiently and effectively with the same goal.
Now, financially, you need to think through a few things, okay? Let's assume for a moment he's 65 years old. We know you look it, but we know you're not 65. And I'm 50. He's going to retire in 2 years. And the cost to open up a new location, let's just call it $500,000. Okay? Now, are we going to take reduced earnings this year so that we can fund it? Or are we going to, in which case, I have a longer runway to recoup my investment than he does. So we have to look at that financial consideration because we don't want to pay 8.5% interest because 8.5% on top of the expected margin is really hard to pull off. So in addition to the cultural aspect and the things that Chip has mentioned, it is also, you have to look at the financial aspect because I have seen too many practices where they have opened a new practice. It was an investment, it was a wise investment, but you have people who are looking to retire before they see the fruits of that investment. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So that's why if you've got for one practice, it may make perfect sense if I have nothing but 45-year-old partners. Full speed, go for it. But just be mindful of how that financial consideration is what that impact can have on potential buyouts in the near future.
For those of you who are stuck in a circumstance like that, you've got some older partners who don't want to participate in a capital investment, there's no reason why your partnership can't actually create the process by which...
There is a path,
Yeah.
it's just, you just gotta be ready
Yeah,
to
well,
talk
okay,
to
the
it.
three of us are going to stick around. We're the ones who are going to make the investment, and we are the ones who are going to get all of the return. You get none of the return. And I've helped practices figure that out.
I have a coding question.
Oh, okay, all right.
I really did.
Jan left, unfortunately. She was back there,
Well,
and might have to run out and get her.
All right, I'm gonna grab the
Slightly-
ripcord and take
Slightly
we have to pull it.
philosophical, right? Because it came up in the AI talk, and then there was a couple other talks where it kind of touched on the time-based coding, and I think we spend too much time coding that way, and I want to talk a little bit about how inefficient that is in a way to make money and how people need to get comfortable with prioritizing medical decision-making, because if you're spending an hour on a patient, that's not nearly enough. That's not as much as you would make by seeing even 3 level 4s in that time, right? So I just want to, and maybe I'm wrong, and that'd be fine if I am, but just how inefficient it is. If all of your coding is based on time, you're losing.
So it's an interesting question, but I think I have an easy answer for you, though.
And we do have Tim Rushford in the back of the room. to
Yeah,
bail
no
us
pressure,
out.
Tim. Yeah. So what I would tell you is this. Bless you. To me, I think of coding by time as being something that you use when it benefits you, right? And so what you should be doing is doing your coding. You should code well, do your visit quickly, do your chart note that day, and in an ideal circumstance, you're not coding by time. However, every single pediatrician in this room gets zapped once or twice or 3 times a day with that 30, 40 minute, hour-long patient, where, and again, because of the 2021 rules, it's not even that you are in the exam room with the patient for 45 minutes. You're following up with some referrals, and or you have to type a really long note. You got a behavioral thing, the classic, he's had a headache for 6 weeks, and in which case, I like the time element because it's the closest you actually get for valuing your cognitive work. Yes, the medical decision-making element of the new E&M rules is still challenging for some people, and you just ask on SOAPM and you'll get 10 different answers for the same question. But most of the time, when you see the debate about MDM and affecting your chart or your coding, those visits weren't 25 minutes long, all right? It's like, is fever with a strep a systemic symptom, and what's the medical decision-making level? You're not going to hit time anyway. That's my guess. Okay. Karen Ford, you look like you have something to say about this.
Yes.
Okay.
So one thing I wanted to know is, I use the MDM tracker for this sometimes because I'm not even sure sometimes if I'm going to be meeting the criteria. Is that still operational? Is it up to date? Have any changes been made on it?
Are you asking for time or on MDM?
The little tracker you guys made that we love so much?
That tracker.
Yeah.
We haven't looked at it in a long, long time. If you have some suggestions or input that you want for the tracker, I'm sure it's outdated. I mean, it does say 2021 on it, MDM 2021. yeah, let me know. We haven't looked at it in a long time. By this point, there must be people with better trackers out there, with better E&M coding things.
If they have them, I'd love to know.
Yeah, okay. Does anyone here have a coding tool that they have online? I have seen at least 2 other coding tools online, but I haven't looked in 2 years. Cliff, do you have any suggestions? Yeah, no, just Yankees chain. All right, yeah, go online. Oh.
Mine's in my protocol.
Ooh.
Mine's in my protocol, like at the end of every visit.
I would like the person who taught the class, are you charting like it's 2024 to provide a more detailed description today?
It was in that course.
I know, that's what I'm saying. What does it mean that it's in your protocol?
So like if there's drop downs for like the problem data, and it's like level 1, level 2, level 3, and so I have a little blurb next to each one. I mean, it's hard to explain, but, and then I have a section underneath that you can kind of explain, is it a level 4? Well, why is it a level 4? So you can just put a little blurb under there. And then like, is it independent historian, or did you have to pick 2 from it? So I have it all written out, and it's like a drop-down menu.
Is there a screenshot of it in your presentation?
Yes.
So go to the app earlier today, right?
Yeah, what was the name of the course?
Something about charting like it's 2024.
Yeah.
Great. So if you want to look in the app for that, and there's not only the presentation slides, you'll be able to watch the recording. So.
Okay.
Great. Who's next?
Next question, please.
Oh, there we go.
Thanks so much. I'll piggyback on a previous question and a previous answer about that second office location.
Okay.
So obviously, we can't be everywhere at once. And so my question is this. So if you are sort of the face of the practice and kind of what the practice is being associated with, and you opt to have a second location and where you are not drawing patients from your current practice. So different part of town, but it's a place where you're gonna attract the same demographic, the same type of patients you normally see, so you should be able to have the same culture, et cetera. You have a person that you're gonna put in that practice as a physician. So would you suggest that if you're the one that's sort of recognized as the face of the current practice, that you are there when it starts up at least 1 day a week, or would you say that's unnecessary?
I would say that there is no magic amount of time to spend there. You need to spend as much time there as possible to make sure that you are delivering what you have told your patients you're going to deliver. I mean, I know your practice. It's a little bit different from the average pediatric practice. You know what I mean? Consciously, like you focus on certain things. And if you want to have your other location operate in a similar manner, put a little tag on that, all right? But if you want the other location to operate in a similar manner, I don't know if 1 day a week will be enough. It might be 4 days a week to start, which screws up your other location, but you are going to have to work hard enough until you know that the culture is working right. My only put a little pin in that, because maybe the other location doesn't have to be exactly like the first location. So, go ahead.
So one of the things to keep in mind is that as you're thinking about new location or provider, is what is the incremental cost for that new location or that new provider? And how many new visits would I not otherwise have gotten do I need to get to cover that incremental cost? Did I say that right?
Yep, and it may be.
What you don't want to do is incur another $500,000 in expense and see the same number of visits across the practice. That's the obvious thing you want to avoid. So let's back into the number. What is the incremental cost? What is your overhead rate? How many new visits? And can I find 1,000 new visits to come into the enterprise or into the practice that I otherwise would not have gotten? If I can see a path where I can't find 1,000 new visits, but I can find 250, well, I don't have quite enough to open a new location, but maybe I can tweak a few things. That make sense?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there are two drivers of that for opening a second location. One of them is you see an opportunity in another part of town where there's no one providing a service, in which case you're really, really hoping for a lot of new patients. The other one is at your existing location, you no longer have enough room to see the patients you need to see. So, you know, you're in location 1 has 4 exam rooms and you have 4,000 patients. You can't, that math doesn't work. So you and you can't expand and you can't move. You can keep your existing location. That's a more tactical thing. You know, it might be okay to, and I've seen this where we have practices. I know we had a practice where they were just in 3 buildings that shared the same parking lot because they were able to that's how they expanded. They added this building, then they added this building, and that's a tactical thing. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you've got to look at it the way Paul was looking at it, which is like, are you drawing new families in, or are you doing this to expand your rooms, frankly? How many rooms you have and how many clinicians you can have operating at the same time.
Sweet. I'm looking for the next hand. Anyone? No one?
What keeps you up at night?
We can't. Yeah, we have plenty of time.
They're not done packing, so we need to stay in
Yeah,
here.
we gotta drag it
Well,
out.
I will take this opportunity to say that once you're leaving the class, if you have not dropped off your lanyard at one of our lanyard drop boxes, please do so. We will recycle them.
Come on, one more question, one more good question. Someone wants to know something about something.
No, I think they all know everything about everything.
Why do
All right,
people
there we
drive
go.
on a freeway and park on a driveway?
Yeah.
No, drive on a parkway and park on a
Right.
Is there, this is, I guess, a shift, is there, in terms of practices, health, like, is there a marker that you see as, okay, that's a practice, financial health is going to be good? Like, what is like the, I guess, the marker of financial health for a practice that you see, okay, when they're doing this with, like, I guess you mentioned, like, oh, 4 examiners for 4,000 patients. Like, do you know, like, oh, they have this amount of rooms, this amount of patients? Like, it's not a great question. I'm off
Well,
the
yeah,
cuff
the
a
first
bit.
thing I'm going to tell you is almost everyone in this room has the dashboard, and that's where I start. When I am on the phone, if you call me, I click, 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 and I'm looking at your dashboard at the same time. Now, the dashboard isn't perfect because it doesn't capture all, how do you capture all the nuances of your financial performance with a number that says 79, all right? But that's where I start. I know a PCC client with a 63 is not doing as well as a client with a 93. So I start there, and that's where you should all start. Personally, when I start futzing around with a practice, I just look for little threads to pull, okay? I look for, the numbers that I look at the most are revenue per visit. It tells me a lot about a practice right away. You know, and I make some subjective guess about the cost of living where that person is located, where that practice is located. So if, you know, we look at one of our Manhattan clients, and if they're getting $210 a visit, I can sort of balance that against a practice in Kansas getting $150 a visit. Is that scientific? No, but I have some sense of it. So I look at revenue per visit. This number used to be really helpful, but since COVID, it's been like like we had an earthquake, and that's sick to well visit ratio. That tells me a lot. Yes, in an ideal circumstance, and this is hard, Tim and I have talked about it, Tim Proctor, but we haven't reached a conclusion yet. What I'd really like to have is a sick to well to chronic ratio. Yeah, well, if any one of you has an idea about how to label a chronic visit, hit me up, because it's not easy. We can't just do it from ICD-10s. Well, we could do it if you were all willing to mark them as chronic somehow during the checkout process, but we're not there yet. I'd like to see that. So right now I use sick to well, and then since you're still, even with the understanding that the chronic isn't picked up, you can If I see a 1.7 or a 1.8, then I'm going to go start looking at the practice. If I see a 1-to-1, I know what type of practice that is. So I look there. I like to break down the revenue per visit by payer. I like to find out if there's one payer that's really just zapping this practice. It's not uncommon. When I look at pricing, so PCC's pricing benchmark in the dashboard has a flaw. And so I just do a little bit, 2 minutes of extra work to look at it. And that is, when you're in the dashboard and you look at your average pricing, it comes back and says you charge on average 200%, or you charge on average 250%. That's a great start, whatever. But it actually doesn't tell you the standard deviation. All right, you could reach a number like 200% because you charge 800% on these and 50% on those, and that is exactly what some of you do. So I go into the system and I say, all right, they're at 190%. I know they're in the zone, and then I run the RVU report that's on PCC system, and I say, I'm going to look at their average price and compare their average price to what they've actually priced it. And you will almost always find that there's some procedures that have been underpriced. However, or just the caveat to that also is, this is something I've been working on nonstop, is vaccines can't be priced by RVUs. You all know this. And routinely, and I guarantee in this room, we have people who are not charging enough for their vaccines and are being paid full price, especially for like the meningitis and the HPV is the big one. All those expensive $200, $300, $400 vaccines. I look at your system and I look for the collection rate on your vaccines. And you're like, what are the chances that Cigna and United Healthcare happen to pay the same amount for a vaccine that happens to be within $2 of your charge? The answer is zero. There's 0% chance.
So in that vein, everyone I've seen walking around should have a list of 3 things to do when you get to the office. Right? Put on your list to adjust the price of Bay Fortis. Bay Fortis is going to increase, has increased its price from last year. So you should increase your fee and your price for Bay Fortis. And while you're there, look at Gardasil and Pediarich and Rototech and everything else. And if you want a really easy way to do it, you can go into Vaccine Shop, you can go into the Pfizer website, look at what your cost is. Don't forget to add the excise tax, and just make a dummy order. We're going to order 1 box of every single vaccine we would possibly need, and it will tell you what the total cost is, and look at it and say, okay, we're going to charge 120, 130% of what that was.
I'll even actually say, more simply, if you're not writing off
Or
at
double
least,
it, I don't care.
writing off at least 20% on every single procedure from every single payer, you are probably leaving money on the table.
Sweet.
Wait, there was a hand.
No, I was going to say we had an online question come in really quick. It just said, staffing our reception to manually schedule appointments has become unsustainably expensive. First, when will online scheduling be available in PCC? But in the meantime, what are practices using as an interim solution for that?
Okay, online scheduling is not a panacea to dealing with people at the front desk. If we could flip on online scheduling right now, you're still going to have significant problems. And there's a reason why, okay? Is anyone here aware of a pediatric practice that does only online scheduling? Okay? It does, like, you still have, your patients don't care about your schedule. So they will gladly play with it until they get the one they want. It's just like open table, all right? Well, I can't get a reservation for 4, I'll get a reservation for 3 and I'll show up with 4 people, which is exactly what your families will do. Oh, you're scheduling well visits? Well, I'll call this sick visit a well visit, or I'll call this well visit a sick visit.
And more to the point, two summers ago, I didn't get the camp physical form done on time for my daughter. It was due 3 days ago. I can't get a checkup for another 6 weeks. My wife said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "I got you." So I called and said, "My daughter had a sore throat," and I showed up with the form.
So you're the guy. You're that guy.
I'm that guy. All right? I know. But man, I haven't been booed like this in a long time. All right? But it illustrates the online scheduling problem.
Yep.
Okay? You all have your preferences as to when you want your newborn, when you want the ADHD controls, when you want your new mom, when you want the double checkups and everything else. And I have yet to see any system that is not without its headaches. The only thing I've been able to see, and I'm speaking from outside the world of PCC, is we'll make available a certain number of 6 slots, and that's it. And in that scenario, jackaroos like me will game the system because my child's not sick, but I need something from them, whether it's an ADHD refill or a camp form.
Yeah,
So be careful what you ask for.
Where I expect, and I'm not speaking for the team working on this right now, what I expect we'll see first is the part that does work, which is doing online scheduling for vaccine clinics. There's no debate about what's happening. You're coming in to get a flu shot. You're coming in to get a COVID shot, and you're just putting names online. And there are 2 things that our clients do to accomplish stuff like that. We have a number of clients use JotForm because you can get a HIPAA compliant version of JotForm. Creates a form online that you can direct your patients to, and it's dynamic enough that they can go in and pick a time, and they can fill those in. The other thing that not enough people do, in my opinion, is that you can set up a very simple form in the portal where your patients can request an appointment. And it's not automatic. It actually has the benefit of a real person saying, okay, I know this person, I know what they're asking for. So you can direct people to the portal and they can send the request in, and whoever's answering your portal can do it without having to actually pick up the phone and track the family down. And I haven't measured, but subjectively, it's like 3/4 of the time you can do it in just click, 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 send, and everyone wins. So some of our clients do that pretty well.
The other thing to think about here with regard to online scheduling, ADHD refills. Okay, I tend to take a different philosophy on scheduling. I try to break things down into long and short visits as opposed to a well and a sick, because we know not every well and every sick is the same, right? And what I like seeing practices do when the parents call for the ADHD refill, say, "Hey, how's Johnny doing?" "Oh, fine." That's a short visit. If mom starts going into a story, that's a long visit. And, and again, that's opening up an hour-long conversation on scheduling, but that's another challenge with the online scheduling. And you're not ordering burgers. You're not ordering a room that again gets assigned for you to sleep in. I mean, it is really complex. And even whether it's Epic, Phreesia, ECW, OP, I mean, all of them have their challenges. And it's not the whole thing.
I assure you, if we saw, here's the thing. Everyone here goes to the doctor, right? I can book my appointments online either through my Epic using doctor or my ECW using doctor, but it requires a human you send the request in and they do it, or I can email them and they'll email me back. All those things are true. If I saw for a second that ECW had this killer way to do online scheduling, we would figure out what the magic sauce is and do it. But Epic doesn't have it. That should tell you something. So, but I want to know, short visit, long visit, what do you call it when the dad tells his daughter that she has a sore throat so she can get her school for her camp for her? A BS visit.
Yeah, the BS visit.
No, but Paul's example is exactly what we're talking about. Yep. There you go.
I'm going to create a protocol. It's going to call it poly visit.
Yeah. So several years ago at PCC, it was in Vermont, I had given a presentation on scheduling, and Dr. Gene Marconi made an excellent suggestion, which was the name in PCC, if they're in all capital letters, that signified that those, regardless of what happened, they're going to get a long slot, right? For example, or something like that. So there are some different things you can do in that.
There are
area.
tricks.
Yeah, there are some tricks.
Our clients, you guys all know this, NED, or extra time, or needs extra time, NED. You all flag people. But anyway, all right. Was there one more? Please.
Yeah, my question is if we can look back at the numbers topic, can you share with us your knowledge about what we need to look at our patient panel, the demographics of our patient panel? What trends we have to look after? And also, what you think is, again, what's a common ratio you look at doctor versus the size of the panel for the doctor? And again, my concern is this, if we are residing in such area, we can see potential demographic shift, and maybe do we need to think about moving our practice, and what would be the alarming trends?
I'll tell you what I look for, but I don't have science to it yet, because it's a little tricky. It's really multifactorial, and it really depends on the practice. It's very localized. But one of the things I do look at is the distribution of well visits, how many 391s, 2s, 3s, and 4s you did. And there isn't a, right version, okay? And that's because, your practice might be older. So a practice with more teenagers should be doing more teenage visits. But what I look for is this. Now, it's going to seem kind of funny, but you have to look at how the well visit codes are categorized. The 99391 is 1 and less. The 392 is 2. Or no, it's actually, it's 1 and less, and then it's 2 to 5, and then 7 to 11, right? Less than 1, 1 to 5, 1 to 4. You guys are all right. I'm just I don't think my brain works right now. But my point is this. The 99391, even though you do a bunch of them, right, you stack a bunch up, that only covers 1 year of patients, all right? And then the 99392, you still do a bunch, not as many 391s as you do 391s per patient, but now you have 4 times as many patients. All right? And so, that's true as you go up. The average, the thing I see most typically, and I wish I had, if I had a piece of paper, I could probably do the numbers really fast in my head and get it, but what I normally see is about 20 to 25% of the visits are 391s. 22 to 28% of the visits are 392s. 22 to 28% of the visits are 393s. And so what that means is the preponderance of your well visits are 1s through 3s. And then, as you know, with the tail, especially it being 12 to 17, yes, and then 18 and over, that's the biggest chunk, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, okay? But you'll have fewer of those because your coverage for those kids is lower. And what I look for is a change in those ratios. That's all. I can't tell you. I mean, you can do some math, all right? You can do some math and say, okay, if you get 60 newborns a month, all right, 720 kids a year. On the face of it, that means you have a really full panel for a new doctor every 2 years. But it's actually less than that, because 720 newborns is not 720 kids distributed across the range. So depending on the way your practice works, I mean, it would be nice, and Alex Mayer and I and Tim, we've looked into some of this, but we haven't reached anything conclusive. I would love to have a number saying, look, X newborns a month equals 1 new provider every year or every 3 years. And I don't have that number, but it's close to. This is a gut feeling. 30 patients, 30 newborns a month gets you a new provider every 2 or 3 years.
Now, there is one caveat, well, there are several caveats, but the first caveat that comes to mind is your physical space. Now, we're going to leave New York City out of the equation, all right? Because real estate's so expensive. But to me, in an ideal world, for you in an office space, if you have multiples of 3, so for every 3 exam rooms, I can have 1 provider working well, okay? So if I've got 12 exam rooms, off the top, I know that 4 providers can work there reasonably well and be efficient, okay? So if you know that, I can look at a practice and say, look, you've got 12 exam rooms, and you have, that means I can have 4 providers there. 4 providers are seeing approximately 22 visits a day. I'm now starting to look at the capacity analysis, right? That is my capacity by which patients can come through the office. Now, how does that capacity compare to what I actually did? I had the capacity for 25,000 visits. What did I actually do? 21. So it kind of dovetails here, and it also references back to the idea of when you bring on a new provider and when you look at a new location. You've got to look at that capacity analysis from a sort of a operations and production management perspective.
What I'll add is, if you have a growing practice, if you're expecting your practice to be around for a long time, I do keep an eye on the newborns and the walk-ins, because they are feeding the practice, because the patients are going out the other end of the conveyor belt. The patients don't go out the other end of the conveyor belt as fast as they can come in, which is fine. You can have 1,000 teenagers in your flock and still be okay. But if you're used to having a you're used to getting 30 newborns every month, and you're now getting 20 newborns every month, and that may not be bad. It just means, though, that you won't be able to grow at the rate you were growing when you were getting 30 newborns a month. So I do track that in terms of patient volume and distribution.
Can we do a quick survey for an idea?
Yep.
So I have a practice that was having a real hard time with visits. And the visit volume just wasn't there. Let's just say that. And so what I said to them was, look at it, checkup compliance rate all the way up to the age of 5, and then it dropped, and then it picks up at 11, and then it drops again. That sound pretty familiar to everybody? Right. So this may be a bonehead idea or a really good idea.
Or both.
Or both. Boneheadedly good.
Mm-hmm.
So what I said was, why don't you implement a new rule? And the rule is very simple. If you have not had a checkup in the last year, you cannot schedule a same-day appointment. How many think that that is a terrible idea? How many think that's a reasonable idea? It's kind of 50-50 of those who answered. Now, we can debate the argument. I mean, it's not the child's fault that the parents are not recognizing the value of being engaged with the medical home. But I was just kind of curious. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that particular scenario, but I think that there also needs to be a shift in the last several years. Healthcare has gone through it's become more transactional. And I think that's what the Village MDs and the Walgreens and the Walmarts of the world were expecting to happen. I think that as pediatricians, you have a very strong value proposition to say, no, we're not going to be transactional. We want to be relationship-based. We want to be a medical home for children, and that requires engagement through every single year with your child in some way, shape, or form. And it's not just for finances. If they expect you to be the medical home, it's a two-way street. You have to engage with each other, and you have to get a commitment from them that they are going to come not just when they're sick, but also when they're going to receive the guidance. Yeah.
Man, I could not do what Owen's doing because I would be out of breath right now.
So
Paulie, I voted that I would have let the child have a visit, not because I disagree with your premise, but I just disagree with the 1 year, right? Make it 2 years.
It meant to be a little bit provoking, yeah.
Make it 2 years, make it 3 years, and I totally agree. We are not an urgent care center. We're here to provide primary care. But I'm going to shift to my real question, which is for Chip, because for a long time you've sort of talked about the sick to well ratio being a super important thing to track, and how we want to emphasize well care, which we do in our practice pretty heavily. But what we're seeing is with all the behavioral health especially, there's a lot more visits that are coded as sick, which are actually you know, chronic disease follow-up.
And
so what
totally
do we do?
agree.
So what's the new ratio? What number should we be looking for?
I don't know right now. A couple reasons why. First of all, not everyone in here, well, your patients across the board may all have the same amount of behavioral health needs. You don't all treat them or see them at the same volume. So I struggle with that. If we had a way, if the CPT codes were consistent enough that we could always identify behavioral health visits, it takes us 30 seconds to update that categorization, and we would do it. I mean, the guy who's responsible for all this is right over your right shoulder right now. He's just that guy right there. And that's why we don't do it. Because and I also know, I was trying to get clever, and I was like, oh, well, what if we pick up every anxiety diagnosis, but you do well visits with anxiety diagnoses, and you do sick visits where anxiety is part of the visit, but it's not a behavioral health visit. And that's what I mean by the chronic stuff. I'd love to be able to look at that, because boy, would that tell us a lot. That one's just really tough. That one bugs me because I know it's not accurate. The other thing I learned this from Lynn Kramer. She said, in order to get more well visits in, you have to have nurses who are triaging your patients and telling them not to come in. Right? If you're stacked with well visits, you need to have nurses who are good and strong enough to say, you don't need to come in for that diaper rash. The fever's 99 degrees. No one in here has ever done anything about a 99-degree fever, all right? That's why witch doctors lasted so long. So what you also see for a practice that starts focusing on well visits, and I have a segue here because, Nelson, this is where I thought you were going. But for practices who focus on well visits, their E&M distribution changes. Because if you don't have a focus on well visits and you say yes to everyone all the time, that's how you get a lot of 99212s. And so now, there are people in this room right now who are like, yep, I get it, Chip, but I still tell everyone they can come in every time. All right? I'll get back to that in a second. Where I thought you were going to go with this is, what are we doing about the fact that I do these well visits and the families have been saving up a year's worth of sick visits? Yes, I mean, that's like, and especially when, there's so many parts of the country where the 2.5 modifier is still, it's still not done right. I don't have an answer for that except for revolution and, torch bearing, because that's all a scam. That's all organized crime. It's like organized crime. And I don't have an answer for that. And what you can do there, though, this is easy, or it's simple, but it's not easy. You have to get better at somehow. I'm not saying I even have a path for it, but you have to get better at getting to your patients sooner. Somehow getting them in a manner where they haven't saved up the and he stopped eating 3 weeks ago, or whatever the 50 different things that you run into. I don't have a great answer to that. That one's like a mild and subtle epidemic among you. And one thing, it's not in the dashboard, but we do have the data. I don't think it's in the dashboard, but the relative use of the 25 modifier in your practices has gone up tremendously the last 5 years. Tremendously. We have some practices who are like 80% of the well visits have a 21325. And of course, an insurance exec would be like, oh, that's just coding, cheating at your coding. I'm like, go to a pediatric office. You know, there is a separate and identifiable, often more than one, reason in addition to that well visit. Yeah. So I don't have a great answer for that, but I think that's something that's going to continue to get worse.
Quick poll, how many of you consistently used, last week, consistently used G2211? 85% of the room?
Yeah. Because these are PCC people.
Good job.
That's why. Because I will yell at you. You saw the video. All right. Yep, go ahead.
So Chip, follow up to your comment of where you thought I was going. I think, personally, the solution to the year's worth of saved up sick visits is the portal, and triage nurses and all the other ways that we.
I didn't pay you to say that, though, correct?
No, but
Okay.
no, but I'm all about access is therapeutic, and
Yeah.
if families know they can get to us, then they don't need to see us as often for.
So how many
for sick
people
visits.
have pretty good portal usage in their practice right now? Yeah, I know, 100%. We remain surprised by, we have practices who haven't turned it on. Yeah. Oh yeah. They're afraid that their patients are going to send them too many messages, and that their patients are going to get all their labs, all the stuff that you're legally required to give to them. We can only lead so many horses to the water.
I do just want to say we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
If we can make it quick, I know Jen O'Brien has a question.
So I would go back to the portal. So I probably shouldn't have said probably it makes you do well, because it most definitely does. So the thing about the portal is that if you make it the utmost priority in your practice, you will find that you'll get all of those questions coming in, and you'll get the least important question, but the questions are repetitive, and we probably have about 30 pages of template responses to the portal message, literally 30 pages alphabetized by topic. Newborn acne, infant wanting more food instead of formula at 9 months, easy things. So we cut and paste, and we adjust it, and we send it out, and we fly through these parent portal messages instead of a triage nurse. And then when they come in for their checkups, they don't have very many questions. And they're very happy with those responses.
Yeah, you can respond to a portal message with more detail in writing faster than a nurse can talk to a mom who's like losing her mind.
Way faster. And then even so we do our pink eye policy is that please never come in for pink eye, whether you think it's or not, unless you really want to. So we have a cut and paste. It's, you just put it in there, and it says our blurb about what pink eye is. It's probably a virus. You don't need anything. It'll probably go away in 2 to 3 days. But if you really need drops to get back to your daycare or your concern, here's a prescription for drops we already sent to your pharmacy. Let us know if you have any questions, but please let us know if it's not better in 7 days. And we do that all the time. We never see those in the office. And that takes me about 30 to 45 seconds. And I've freed up all that space for the checkups that were caught up.
That is the magic part.
I know. I see everybody's hands. I've seen like 5 hands go up. We really, really don't necessarily have time to get to everybody. I am going to go in order of the hands that I've seen, to be fair.
For the tracking chronic, so you're really tracking the follow-ups, right? That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And we use the care management plan order to track for PCMH and CQA. And so that would be a relatively straightforward way. That's assuming people use it. We have one of our major payers that just flat out refuses to pay a 25 modifier on a well.
Right.
And I have a plan for that. It's probably not going to work, but whatever.
You kick and scream and use shame, and you.
I know.
You know.
I got a list of things to do, and I had another. There was that, and then I was going to say something related, but it's gone. So someone else can go.
I'm going to go as fast as I can.
So I love the portal. I use it all the time. It keeps sick kids who aren't sick out of the office.
Yes.
And it does let you address the pink eye. By the way, my pink eye instructions say go get Zaditor, ketotifen. Don't bother me with a prescription request, because until they've tried that for a couple of days, there's no point. But my concern or my question is, what happens when people get so used to using the portal that they send messages about my kid is having breathing difficulty at 2 in the morning? And I can't get them to understand the portal is email. we check it. We have an education piece on this, but call us or text us, because when you call us or text us, you get me or my other clinician. And how do we fix that?
People are saying you put a disclaimer and they read it or don't. Dr. Birch.
So I don't use the portal as much, sorry. I use a communication platform, Spruce, that functions in very similar ways. We'll probably transition over to the portal eventually as more functionality. It does have an automated response, so that's time-based.
Yep.
So that's a feature that might be a good wishing well feature of having time-based automatic responses to the portal. But help me understand from a business perspective why we would turn somebody away that wants our care and our service in the office. It'd be like saying, here is a patient, here's
I'll tell you
somebody
why.
walking into Walgreens that just wants to buy a candy
So
bar.
you're sitting next to someone who's going to give you a 30-minute lecture.
As
and you're-
long as you have access, as long as you maintain your access for the well child checks and everything.
Let me take one stab at it, and then I want to see if Stephen Hirsch and I will duel on this, all right? The first thing I will say is your parent does not, in fact, want to come into your office. They want to solve the problem for their kid. Number one. That is, yes, you do have some crazy parents who want to come in and see you, but really, overwhelmingly, what they want to do is have this problem go away. So the best thing that you can do as the clinician is give them an answer that's easier, faster, and more clear, like the pink eye stuff, as an example. However, if you are Mark Helm and you've opened up a second location, bring them all in for the first 18 months, okay? I'm like, let's be real. You gotta balance this against what you are setting up for expectations. But eventually, you grow to a point, if you're really preventive care oriented, and there are people in this room who have totally consumed the Bright Futures Kool-Aid. All right, I'm one of them. Like we've got some really highly intense, well-visit people in this room. Well, you know, when you get good and the word gets around town, how deeply you work with your patients and you're doing those well visits, you will not have that room. And so when I talk about dissuading people from coming in, it's only to the level that you're full. Right? If you have an empty slot, there's no magic formula to this, but if you have an empty slot, you give people a choice. Hey, I don't think you need to come in, but I do have something open at 3:30 today. All right.
Wait, really quickly, I just want to say we are at time, and we can go on a couple minutes. I wish we could go on forever with this, but we do need to pack up the conference in the room. So again, Ask Chip doesn't end with Ask Chip. Chip exists in the real world and will be here. I know that we can't really have these group discussions, and I know that folks at home won't be able to hear all of this, but please, approach us, email Chip, email Paul. It's like
Almost
it's available.
everyone in this room has emailed me before.
Yeah.
All right, I'm in your address books.
So I
90%.
apologize that we can't keep going, but thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming to the UC.
And thank you to Polly. And everyone look around. You are the cool kids who lasted to the very end of the conference.